Deputy Speaker, an overhaul of Australia's aviation sector is long overdue. From flight delays, regular cancellations, the decline of low-cost carriers that provided important competition to the sector, and opaque government decisions to deny greater access to overseas carriers, the system is not delivering for customers. My constituents consistently vent to me each time airlines are in the news that all they want is reasonably priced and reliable flights. But the system doesn't change, and instead they're continuously met with poor quality services and limited options for recourse. I welcome the introduction of this bill, and while this bill just relates to the operation and efficiency of Sydney Airport, competition and efficiency for Australia's busiest airport has ripple effects throughout the entire system. In 2023, national cancellations were just 3.6%. However, nearly 1 in 10 flights between Sydney and Melbourne, Australia's busiest route and the 5th busiest route in the world, were cancelled. But while I support this bill, celebration is a bit premature. This bill will make rather modest changes to the operation of Sydney Airport, with only 3 of the 8 reforms signalled in the Aviation White Paper covered. The remaining 5 are expected to be delivered under reforms affecting slot management system and demand management regulations. The government has not shared details of what these changes will be, and we cannot be sure if they will go appropriately far enough. I also note that we have not yet seen the government's response to the Senate inquiry into impact and mitigation of aircraft noise, and do not know how the government proposes to address community concerns about aircraft noise and questions about whether Sydney Airport's long-term operating plan is fit for purpose. I want to briefly speak to that because certainly the residents in some of my community are concerned about the Sydney Airport's long-term operating plan, both in terms of whether it is adhered to currently, but also whether it is fit for purpose, and particularly concerned with a lack of adequate transparency in relation to what is actually happening in terms of airline movement. Now, a lot of that data is available, but that data is quite opaquely available, and it is very difficult as a member of the public, just trying to understand what's going on, to be able to access that data very easily. So I know that is not the subject of this bill, but I want to highlight that there are many in my community who are concerned about this, and I certainly support the further engagement on this really important issue, and certainly through the Sydney Airport Community Forum. But let me return to the bill. The bill amends the Sydney Airport Demand Management Act 1997 following the Productivity Commission inquiry into economic regulation in airports and the subsequent Harris Review in 2021. Both inquiries found significant issues with efficiency, competition and governance of Sydney Airport and recommended changes. The biggest impacts this bill will have is through the introduction of recovery periods, reporting requirements on airlines and the slot manager about cancellations, as well as slot allocations and cancellations, and more stringent reporting and expanded civil penalties for slot misuse. I welcome the introduction of a recovery period that will temporarily increase movements. This will allow the airport to return to regular operating capacity quicker following weather events. I do welcome the penalties and stricter reporting obligations on airlines for cancellations and irregular slot movements. However, I question whether the penalties are sufficiently strong deterrent to prevent slot hoarding and other forms of slot misuse that make it difficult for new entrants to compete. I also welcome the decision to attempt to appoint the slot manager by a process of competitive tender, but note that the bill is silent on the issue of airline ownership of this. Deputy Speaker, these changes are positive, but they are unlikely to significantly move the dial on competition in the aviation sector. I acknowledge that further changes have been slated under foreshadow changes to the slot management scheme, and I eagerly await this detail. But there are also some missed opportunities. Stakeholders in the aviation sector that I've spoken to are disappointed with the decision not to make changes to the 80-20 rule. This rule adopts a use it or lose it approach to gate movements, requiring airlines to use the allocated slot for at least 80% of the time. While the Harris Review discussed but stopped short of shifting to a stronger test, such as 90-10, stakeholders I've consulted consider 80% to be too low a threshold to genuinely open up competition and limit slot hoarding. Similarly, both the Productivity Commission and the Harris Review found that the 15-minute rolling window in the movement cap had outlived its usefulness, and removing this would allow movements to happen more smoothly and reduce delays. But it is unclear why this modest change was not adopted. These changes that the bill represents are positive, but they are late. The Productivity Review was conducted in 2019, and the Harris Review was conducted in 2021. The issue with efficiency and competition in the airline sector has been a problem known to governments of both stripes for a long time. Yet it took until last year to get a green paper and August this year to get a white paper. That's a space of 6 years and 4 years between the respective reports and the release of an action plan, not to mention legislation. Now, I note that this is not all to do with the current government. This is also an issue in relation to the previous government and the delays in taking action on these issues, but it is one that does concern me. And I think this is reflective of a broader problem that we have, where governments commission reviews, reports and recommendations, but those reviews, reports and recommendations are often sometimes not made public and often just left to gather dust, and rarely is the government actually fully obliged to respond and provide clear guidance on whether they're going to go ahead with the recommendations. For instance, I look at the Productivity Commission's report. Productivity is one of the biggest issues. Our productivity gap is one of the biggest issues facing our country at the moment in terms of economic performance. We have the Advancing Prosperity report released by the Productivity Commission, whose main job is to enhance productivity in this country. This report was released in 2021. It still does not have a government response. We have two separate reports criticising the allocation of billions of dollars in federal infrastructure investment, and again, we do not have formal government responses. In New South Wales, where I'm from, tabled reports require a government response within 6 months. And I think our track record suggests that some sort of legislated discipline is what government needs of all stripes, including a legislated obligation to actually table reports that are commissioned and table those reports in full, so that the community who is paying for the reports and who also contribute to the reports in the work that they do in advocating and certainly all the work that stakeholders do in advocating, that those reports actually have the consideration of the government of the day. Thank you.